All right, Iris, can you see the?
Yes. I can see that. Yeah.
Okay, so this, like, if this presented itself on a guitar that was valuable, this would give me anxiety.
Not me, because all the original splinters are there. What are you worried about?
Well, I mean, so there's a lot
missing when you have to start worrying.
There's just a lot happening cross grain there. You know, there's like all of these little cross grain things, and I mean, I don't see anything cross grain there in the after picture. So I kind of
I was pleased how that went. Actually, it was actually a brand new instrument that hadn't even been sold yet. A local maker who suddenly realized in his showroom, well, something happened. He doesn't know when or where or how. So it's an insurance job. He only lives about an hour away from here, so he dropped it round. So because it's on a rib, and the rib is only, I don't know, 1.2 millimeters thick, and so basically the front had to come off. So luckily the front came off really easily and really well. No splinters. My dream of removing a front on this was great. So the next thing is literally just, you've got everything there, all the bits are there. I don't think it needed much cleaning. So it was literally a matter of trying to get glue into all those little cracks and areas. So by flexing them a little bit from behind and just getting the glue in all those nooks and crannies and onto the area, and then using two hard plastics. I think there is a photo also of the gluing. So I just put some soap basically on the inside of the plastic, you know, so that, because what you don't want is you want the plastic to stick to the varnish, and then you remove the plastic and pull half the varnish off with it. Same on the inside, really hard plastic with as many clamps I can get onto the area, and literally just pressing it flat.
Iris, can I interject really quick?
Mm-hmm.
Soap. You're using soap to keep from
just to keep the plastic from sticking against the varnish, because I mean, I remove a little bit of the glue before I press it together, but there's always a bit of glue will squeeze out, so I make sure I put some soap onto the plastic, which is just sitting on the outside so it doesn't go into the cracks. You know, it's just that glue will squeeze out, and just to make sure that I don't end up damaging the varnish, because when you then pull the plastic away afterwards, the plastic could literally get glued to the varnish, and then you ending up removing original varnish there. So that's quite important.
Any particular soap? You know, like I've always used like wax paper, and then there's times where wax paper just will not work, and I've been tempted to use wax, but I don't want to get paste wax into my project.
I've literally got a piece of just bar soap, really old piece that I use for everything. I use it for pegs. I use it for that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So.
Okay.
Yeah, that's important. Literally just needed pressing flat, really, and because it's so flexible, it's only like around 1.2 millimeters thick. That piece of rib. So it's you know, quite easily you can manipulate it, and all you want is that flat surface back again on the outside.
Are these lines here indicating anything, or is this?
No, that was just for me to know which side I put the soap on, I think.
Okay.
Doesn't really actually mean anything other than which side, you know, put it the right way. I just put a little circle to know that one, it's this way round, basically. Yeah.
And then, is this our old friend Deft?
Yes. I mean, I did have to, you can probably see in that where the crack is going along the sort of, as the flames are running, along there. I did actually use a little bit of filler in there, and I think we spoke about that before. I used Scotch-Lite. I use Scotch-Lite filler, which is basically a white glass powder that I then color with different kind of inks to get to wood color. slightly darker because it dries a little bit lighter. And so I did have to put a little bit of filler in some of those areas. So it wasn't actually completely perfectly flat. I mean, there was a little bit of, obviously, some tiny, almost invisible bits of wood and probably, but anyway. I do, yeah, I think we spoke about that in the first Zoom we did together, yeah, so that would be on your site somewhere as well. Anyway, so how I do that, because I mix it with hide glue. I basically make a wood paste, and the reason I use that is because on these kind of instruments, the reflection is always an issue. When you're turning the instrument and you're doing the retouching, it might look right in one direction, but then not in another. And with this kind of filler, it sort of helps a little bit because somehow it seems to bounce the light off in a way that's better than other kind of standard water-based wood fillers.
Yeah.
So yes, and then deft goes on top. Once that Scotch-Light filler is dry, deft goes on top. I have to wait a day or two for that to dry, and then I literally just scrape that flat. Because it's always, I mean, texture in general, which means what it looks like when the light bounces off the surface is very underrated in terms of getting a good job done. To me, that's very important, but it's also very time consuming and quite boring to do all that scraping off deft. And
so originally the varnish color would have been closer to the wood, correct? Like you're actually creating kind of a barrier layer of deft and then touching up on top of the deft.
Yeah, I find that it's easier for me to create the texture beforehand because my retouch varnish is so thin, and then there'll be a coat of clear goes over the top of that area and the slightly wider at the end. So because my retouch varnish that I apply is mainly alcohol with a tiny amount of spirit varnish in it. That's why it actually can go on top of the deft almost after the texture is already finished.
Yeah, and by texture you mean all of this kind of this stuff where it's actually shrunk back into the wood grain, or
by texture I kind of mean what it looks like when you can see the light bouncing off the surface there. That maker actually leaves the surface quite almost unfinished in a way, just as it comes off the brush. There's quite a lot of bits in there, and it's a little bit, you know, quite shiny and left quite rough in a way. He doesn't cut it back at all. So you kind of, whatever texture you're given by the original, you kind of have to imitate what's around it so that you don't see any difference when the light bounces off that surface. It should look the same as the original around it. So here you can see it looks too flat. So it looks flat, it's all blending in, but when you're looking at the original and then the deft area, it's got more flatness to it. It looks rougher. So then afterwards, with putting the retouch on top and the clear varnish, hopefully that sort of matches in better with the original than actually on this picture. But that's basically what I aim for, is to sort of blend it in so that you really basically end up with the same.
So this is, even though this is, you know, looking good, this is still cross grained. Does this give you concern? Are you doing anything to kind of work around this to disguise it?
So this is where I put the filler on. So you can see the Scotch-Light filler is sitting in that sort of cross area. So that would have sort of filled it. It would have not been very deep. It would have only been sort of just to level the surface. But then that also means I might have to adjust my retouching on top. You know, if it's a bit darker than the surrounding area, then I wouldn't touch that area until I've sort of got the same kind of color all around. So it all comes, you know, that kind of needs to be considered when I do my retouching as well.
Some of what I see is you adding figure with color. Would you ever be tempted to bring a one of these flames up and have it meet that, or is that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I wouldn't probably do that until I've kind of just blended in the sort of first basic ground color, the sort of color in between the flames first. Well, actually, no. I mean, as I go along, I just copy what goes across, but you also obviously have to be careful when you're turning the instrument. The flames might actually be next to the flames you can see now.
Yeah.
So you always, with those kind of, with a maple, it's always taking all that into consideration. And when I'm retouching, I literally turn the instrument all of the time to make sure it won't look too dark from a certain direction. It needs to work in all directions, really. But then again, when you're doing peg bushings, for example, and you've got end grain, you can't really win. So in those scenarios, I just make it look direction that most people would look at most of the time. So
yeah. So here we see kind of a montage of it disappearing, it looks like.
Yeah, so I just kind of usually start from the edges, really working my way towards the more tricky area in the middle where I did have that kind of wood filler in there as well. And just, yeah, I mean, sometimes, I mean, this was a fairly straightforward one, really. It's more tricky when you've got an area where you've got different kind of staining of the wood underneath, for example, when you've got grayer and brighter areas. So you kind of have to even that out first. So my aim is, when I start any retouching job, is to even out the first color, really, the color that sits lowest on the wood, like the lightest yellow, bring that across to all the other areas. And then if there's some areas that are a bit stained or so I need to then change my retouching color to a brighter color to even out that darker ground. That, if it's a grayer ground, you need to basically then put a brighter color on top to match it with the rest. So it's always a bit of a game, to try and even out the ground color, and then it's easier to put, to put the rest on top, because once you've got an even color of the ground, and then you can just kind of use the same color for the rest of it in a way.
So here there's a flame that's going kind of in here. Are you just bringing out a flame that was originally there? I mean, I guess what was the original way that he would have got these flames to stand out? Was this just like spirit varnish over bare wood, or did he do any bare wood dyeing first?
It looks to me like he did put quite a lot of color into the ground. So, there's definitely a bit of stain going on. So in a way that made it easier for me, because when you're putting some stain into the wood, in a way, it sort of almost dulls down the movement slightly. Or it also means that from every angle you can see that flame slightly, whereas if you have the barrier between the wood and the varnish, then in some directions you literally don't see the flame, and in the other direction you see it really strongly. Whereas if there's some staining in the wood, you can see a little bit of the flames in all directions. So that helped me. So what I did here, I actually enhanced that flame that you probably wouldn't have seen particularly before from one certain direction, but because of the staining in the wood, it made it easier for me to hide that up.
So there was actually maybe a little bit of flame here originally.
I think there was a flame here, which would have been more obvious from another direction, and not so much from this angle. So
and you handed this back and he went, "Oh my God," right?
Yeah, he was very, very happy, especially because I did it quite quickly as well, but that was partly to do with the fact that front came off so easily. So that was quite a fun job to do. It did it.
Iris, is there anything in here? I mean, this peghead graft, I mean, is stunning. Is there anything in here you want to talk about that you think? This is kind of the one that was having to do with one of the questions I had earlier, which was the selection of wood. But I don't know.
So on a front, I would basically split a piece of wood, assuming that hopefully the piece of wood that was used for the front originally would have come from a split piece. Then you try and match the width of the grain, the different angles, and that's often all that you can do, really. And then keep your fingers crossed, because you won't know until you start the retouching how it's actually going to work out, which is always can be very frustrating.
how much of the raise are you looking at here to kind of determine where it's at? Is it all in the reflectance, or are you looking at kind of
Yeah, I do
subtle?
look at it a little bit just to compare to the original, hopefully. I mean, it's a very difficult piece of wood because it's a cello front, but the grain is extremely narrow. Because I always like sort of enhancing grain lines on fronts, but with this cello front, they're almost invisible. So in this case, it would have been more important to also look at the medullary rays and see which direction they go. And if you get the piece of wood at the right angle, it should quite easily match basically the medullary rays. And it depends what you're matching, whether I'm looking more at the medullary rays or the I mean, I always try and match the grain really, but sometimes they're more important than other times.
On the enhancement of grain lines, is there a limit to how small you can paint? Like, I mean, if you have a grain line, I mean, I find that I run into like just like viscosity issues on my brush, and like I can't sometimes paint down to like the sizes that I'm interested in. We're dealing with different mediums, but I know varnish can be tricky to get to come off the brush too. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, my brushes work very well because they keep a lot of the varnish in, but it's still a very pointy brush. So you need quite a lot of intense pigment, but you also need just enough, not too much varnish, just enough varnish that it actually comes off the brush. So I use my brush always very dry when I paint grain lines, but I mean, they can be pretty narrow. I guess if it gets less than 0.3 of a mil or something, then it starts to get a bit tricky, but it does help a lot. And I use this method a lot on fronts, and also like on this neck graft, we just looked at my recent post, I did paint the grain lines through a little bit on that.
These are,
yeah, so they are sort of
through.
painted through from the original onto the graft, just to sort of fool the eye a little bit. And also the flex, I sort of at least enhanced a bit. They actually did match quite well on the new neck anyway, and yeah, but you can see I've sort of painted some flecks in there just to bring them across.
So you put on dry with just enough varnish to, you know, kind of, you know, bind the pigments in place. Are you having to do come back over with actual spirit varnish? And if so, is it hard to keep from kind of fuzzing out these intricate grain lines that you're painting?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what. So I do the grain lines and I make sure the ground is okay. I always end up putting, with a slightly wider brush, I'll put some clear retouch alcohol varnish over the top again, over the whole area. What I also do a lot is I pad the area with my hand all the time, like often with the end of my hand here, just kind of pad it to not end up with brush marks and that sort of thing. It works especially well on peg, on the side of peg bush, on peg walls.
One of the things we deal with in guitars is we have, you know, pigments and dyes, you know, oftentimes on the same instrument, and the lacquer has very aggressive solvents in it, like more aggressive than alcohol. And so like a lot of times if you're not careful, you can spray a clear coat onto something and then have your touch up kind of move around on you, but that's not an issue with brushing clear varnish over your touch up.
It can be if you do it. It's like you just do it the once and you leave it. And quite often, I mean, like I said, quite often I end up just padding the varnish straight after I've put it on. And I mean, it quite often happens that I accidentally then take all my retouch or part of my retouch varnish off again that I've just done. So it's a bit of a, yeah, it can happen quite easily as well. And also, you know, the best is to just do it, put it on once and leave it. Give it enough time, then you could maybe still manipulate the texture slightly with your hand or whatever, but then just give it a bit of time. Yeah, sometimes when I'm impatient, it can happen that I end up putting stuff off again, which is really annoying, but it definitely happens. Yeah.
This is stunning. I mean, this is really, really I mean, I
Thank
don't
you.
even know
Yeah,
what to
no,
say
it's
about
quite
that.
fun doing this one because actually the neck graft is a good neck graft. It's just it was a bit too bright orange mainly around there. So it did, took a little bit of time to remove what was on there, but yeah, it did look much better in the end.
How
It's actually a very pale varnish all round, so it matches much better now.
how often, I mean, we deal with this in guitars a lot where um, you know, like the competency doesn't overlap. Like, so whoever did this repair initially, their woodworking skills were pretty top shelf. Is that correct?
Mm, yeah, definitely.
Like, how often do you find it that somebody can do kind of the mechanical side and just doesn't, they don't have the eye for doing the bringing it
Yeah,
on
it's
home?
so incredibly common. The problem is there isn't really anywhere to learn this kind of skill unless you kind of manage to be one of the few to get into a really good shop where they take the time off to teach you. And it's just basically that there is a lack. There is definitely a lack of teaching out there for learning those kind of skills.